As a police leader who has responded to many mental health calls, I recognize the need for tools that enhance collaboration between behavioral health and law enforcement. Gelada simplifies co-responder and crisis response programs with smarter data and communication solutions. For a demo, visit julata.com or check the show notes. That's JULOTA.com.
Especially over the last few years, from George Floyd, BLM, COVID, police have been getting a bad rap in a lot of ways. You see a lot of members out there, especially at the frontline levels. They don't get to talk about what they do.
Certain agencies that withdraw from the media because they're like, you get the press release because you've done me dirty. Like I did this very candid interview. You took a couple pieces that just made me look like. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. I am here with a guest I'm really excited to introduce you to for several reasons. He's someone that he's super busy, as a lot of people are that come on the show, but he runs his own show, and that's a lot of that. He's also active law enforcement up in the true north. Shout out to our neighbors in Canada. But all these things said, he runs his own show. And so very much like the listenership here, very much like myself, he is a continual learner. He's a student of the craft. And that's what I really appreciate. That's where it gets a lot more fun at times when there is someone that has a host of their own interviews that they roll in and bring into the show in the mix. So without further ado, Nathan Romas, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I've been following along with Blue Grit Radio and the wellness piece. You're doing some awesome stuff and helping members out. So yeah, I'm glad I can get on here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. You guys say members a lot for like your personnel, right? For like your officers, as far as like the community. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if there's like a confirmed term we got to use, but yeah, I think that's just kind of the standard.
Yeah, I've heard it a lot. And a connection back as well, where we got connected. I should have put this in the beginning. I mean, we're close enough to the beginning, but another reason why I'm really excited is because our mutual friend, Mark Bouchard, is who connected us and who propped you up and saying, hey man, you need to connect with this dude. You guys need to get on each other's shows. I'm fortunate to have been on your show relatively recently. So thanks for having me on there. But now I am that much more excited after spending some time and getting to connect a little bit to be able to share your insights and experiences with my audience.
Yeah, I don't want to disappoint listeners. I'm not as smart as Mark. So
no one's as smart as Marker. Yeah.
I can offer some wisdom, maybe some experiences, but that dude he's well studied. He's probably one of the smartest people I've ever talked to. He's been on the show on my podcast a few times. Yeah, he's brilliant. He's awesome. He's doing some really cool stuff for the RCMP, so the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, in the whole member wellness side of things. So yeah, he's definitely a guy to follow across all the platforms, social media, and just kind of check him out. He's also super helpful. If people ask him for help, he's always willing to put himself out there.
Yeah, absolutely. We've connected numerous times. He's been on the show, and yeah, shout out to Mark. You are super intelligent. I know he's going to listen to this because he's such a he's such like a good like a buddy, right? He's like in your corner. He's a cheerleader in a lot of ways, and yeah, absolutely for the industry and for wellness and getting better leadership, ownership, building culture. I actually heard you guys discussing that on one of your episodes, right? Like in a third guest, you might know off the cuff, but talking about culture.
Yeah, I think maybe it was Matt Domiancic.
That's who it was. Yeah.
One. So
I wasn't going to try to pronounce that last name.
Yeah, he's good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the audience is appropriately introduced, and they're probably thinking a lot of things. But man, if you could just give us a little intro to who is Nathan and what brought you into law enforcement.
Yeah, so I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, so kind of central Canada, if anybody doesn't know where that is. And I spent most of my life there, but I always kind of I just watched a lot of the movies, right? Like all the stuff from back in the day, the Die
Mm-hmm.
Hards, and the Lethal Weapons, and all that, and it just seemed really cool. I thought, like, wow, you get to do a lot of stuff as a police officer. Obviously, some of that's sensationalized, and
Some of it,
um,
yeah. And then
yeah, some
sometimes
of
it
it.
gets there, yeah.
But you know what? I always just thought like there's something kind of bigger and better I could do for friends, for family, for community, for just where you're living, where you're working. And I always thought that was kind of a good path to go down. Now
Mm-hmm.
I did get my degree when I was looking at applying, like in Winnipeg at the time. They only put through like one class a year, or sorry, one class every 2 years, and they're taking maybe 40-ish members. So you had like upwards of 1,000 or more people applying for very few spots. So when you were applying, uh, they could really have their pick of who was coming in. And one of the things I was told by some of the officers I talked to was have a fallback. Like you got to have something else. So, if you don't get in, chances are very low. So I continued with my education, got a degree in both finance and marketing. So it's just like a double major. So once I did that, I applied to the police, but I applied to the local police of Winnipeg, but also with the RCMP. And I always kind
Mm-hmm.
of had um, just kind of a vision of doing that real big in scope type of policing. So they're the federal police up here. They also have a few other mandates, but they're the federal police. So you could travel abroad with them. You could work right across the entire country. So that really appealed to me. So I got in with them, ended up going that path. They moved me a little ways across the prairies, so over to Alberta, so a couple provinces over. And from there, I've been out here since and ended up jumping up to the Edmonton police just for family reasons. But yeah, that's where I've been since. So I'm with the Edmonton police. Did a few years in our downtown division, which is kind of like it's a mix of everything. So a mix of everything from people living in shelters on the street to you have the high rises that cost millions of dollars. There's NHL players in them. There's celebrities. Like it's the whole spectrum of people you could deal with. There's entertainment areas, and it's just overall you get like a varied experience of what it is that you could do as a police officer. But being there, it put me in touch with a lot of different units,
Mm-hmm.
and just because it's out of our headquarters, so drugs, gangs, firearms, there's homicide, there's robbery, there's tons of stuff in there. So you get to talking with everybody, and throughout my career, it just kind of grew my interest a lot in gangs and organized crime. So that's where we kind of come to today. I work with our gang suppression team, and we are essentially an overt intelligence unit. So we go out and deal with people under some gang legislation that we have here, but also look to do the enforcement of kind of the provincial and criminal acts. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm up to now. And then obviously podcasting.
Yeah. And your show is The Quiet Professional?
Yeah, I got this.
Yeah.
I got that going.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, doing the podcasting, honestly, I was saying this the other day. In the 2.5 years I've been doing this, I've probably learned more about law enforcement and policing just from the people I've talked to within this realm
Mm-hmm.
than like my 12 years, 13 years of policing. And it's just because through this I'm able to talk to people I'd never have an opportunity to talk to in another life.
Yeah.
Um, but they're so successful in their fields, and they've been to places, right? They've been around the world, and they've done the craziest of the crazy things. And it's yeah, it's been a whirlwind, but I think one of the coolest things was just, and we'll probably get into it, is the stuff I've learned, how I've been able to pass that on to others,
Mm-hmm.
and really seeing them kind of absorb the language that I'm using that others have used and passed to me, and then I'm passing it on. The ideas and just how to address things like criminality, or leadership. Like there's a lot we talk about, but yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. No, I love that. I mean, there's so much that I've reflected on and said on many episodes, which is that I get the benefit of being able to pick the brains of people from across the nation and abroad, right? And so a lot of these are industry leaders. And for my show, certainly outside of law enforcement at times, whether it's military or just leaders in general or people in the healthcare wellness space, right? Because it all intersects into what I'm trying to put out, but it's all of their shared insight, experience, and education. And then it's this kind of sharpening of iron that I get to partake in. And then I like to look at it like, the show is essentially like an amplifier to that, and we can share it at
Yeah.
scale. And so that's been super rewarding. And yeah, absolutely. If not for formats like this and social media and technology, and would we have ever been connected? Like, would I have ever been connected with Mark? Who
Yeah.
knows? Probably not, right? Probably not. But fantastic. So where did the name Quiet Professional come from? And then what was the impetus to start it all?
So the name came from a few different places, but I think it's largely, you would see it kind of referring to things like special forces in the military. And just with all the things that are going on in policing, especially over the last few years, from George Floyd, BLM, COVID, police have been getting a bad rap in a lot of ways, and some of it deserves, some of it not. But it's just, you see a lot of members out there, especially at the front line levels. They don't get to talk about what they do. Maybe their service isn't supportive of them. Maybe it's just, yeah, they got it in their policy, like you don't talk to media. So it's just kind of a play off of that. So it's the Quiet Professional, and it's just from trying to get some membership, get them a voice, and get them not necessarily directly in contact, right? Like I'm not getting them in contact with the politicians, but I can ask the questions on their behalf. I'm out there, I'm operational, I can speak to people in certain positions because of this format, right? Because of this medium that we have. So then I can bring ideas directly to them. So that was part of the reason for why we started it. It was to improve communication between our police association, so like the union, and the membership. In turn, it was also going to be a way to improve communication between the police service and the association, stakeholders, and what the membership is doing, what they're thinking, the questions that they want to ask. So it was a lot about bringing those things to the forefront, largely about cutting out the middleman.
Mm-hmm.
Because you see the front line has a certain idea, and it's got to
Yeah.
go through 8 ranks before it gets to the chief or someone. The message gets horribly distorted in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just about bringing people closer together, front line to whoever it had to be. And that's been kind of the ride we've been on for 2.5 years.
Yeah, man, that's fantastic. I think I've just passed 2 years in doing this project, but exactly what you said right there, right? Like when it has to get translated through the line, how much distortion can happen to the message. I mean, we
Yeah.
play that game with children, and it's called telephone. Do you guys
Yeah.
call it something different?
No, it's a telephone game.
Yeah. So
But
like, and
yeah.
even like kids learn quickly. Oh, as soon as like I whisper something over here, within a few seconds, it is grossly different just because I misheard. And that's just like that's a kid game. And then we expect to be able to do the same at scale and not have it get taken out of context. And so I love that. And I think that's been a proxy, I suppose, benefit and goal of mine too. As I've changed positions, I've recognized and I've reflected on this too, where, yeah, my 40 to 60 hours a week is spent on thinking about this thing and this role. And so that, my platforms have taken different perspective because that's actively what I'm thinking about, right? When I started it, I was all about recruiting because that was my job. And then when I took over training sergeant at the same time, then I integrated a lot more talk about training. And then now it
Yeah.
is so much more like cultural alignment because as command staff, you are essentially the middle and hopefully you're trying to build alignment, right? And so having this conversation is what I heard from what you shared is that you're able to let people hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And that ultimately does what? Like it builds empathy and it's just understanding like we're all people. We're all trying to do a good job. We all expend a lot for this job we do. We're not trying to come in and be divisive or anything, but somehow that happens. And because we forget that we're human and that we ultimately have the same goal at the end of the day.
If I could pick up on the thing you're talking about, like as it being a kids game, I think that actually is a pretty good maybe a dichotomy where, when the kids are doing it, when you're just trying to pass a message along, it's just that it's just that, like, it's just a game, right? And they're really trying to just remember the words you said and say it to the next person. But when you get to adults, now
Mm,
you're adding in motivation,
mm-hmm.
risk, fear, right? Maybe
Yep.
they don't want to
Yep.
pass the message along because they're scared that they're gonna get in
Yeah.
trouble, something will get
Mm-hmm.
taken away from them. You add in all these other factors, like, your message is changing horribly just from you to the first person, right? Like, at least kids might make it two or three before the message changes, but when you're dealing with
Yeah.
adults in an environment like law enforcement, oh yeah, you could get it gets changed real quick.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's every workplace, every organization maybe is a better term to use, but then yes, law enforcement, there tends to be these other structures, rank structure, personality dynamics that can be more challenging. And for sure, we all have our biases, right? We all have our intentional or unintentional or any blend there within where we say something, we don't really recognize our tone, or we say it and we recognize very much our tone of what, hey, I have to pass on this message. I will say the same words, but my people will know whether I believe in it or not. And I'm not just saying you just need to carry the message from above with all belief. I'm just saying, for example, they'll know whether I'm behind it or not, and that could translate all a myriad of ways in how they internalize it and whether they internalize it or whether it's just like, this is literally what I have to say, but I don't expect any of you to do it. I'm not doing it either. Like, we all know
Mhm.
what that, I guess it could be called malicious compliance looks like,
Yeah,
which is corrosive. Absolutely.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think, like, with kind of going back on the podcast stuff, though, I think it's a good way to get the message across. Especially, I like how you're saying, you kind of change the topics, like you're in recruiting and then you're
Hmm.
training. That's actually a really cool idea. So,
Yeah.
changing it up, but you're getting, you speak to this for a while, and you can help members in that respect. Now you're doing another thing. So yeah, really cool.
Yeah. It's not really my intent as much as it just happens, right? Like, I still talk about recruiting a lot. I think that was the last episode that just aired at the time that we're recording, where it was a lot of what I was thinking about was for the new peeps and those trying to come to the job, like skill development, what they should focus on, managing stress. Of course, there's benefit to people coming in and mid career because we need reminders, and then those that are kind of exiting. Like, there's always these main three audiences I'm thinking about now, but it is so much because of what your inputs are going to affect your outputs. So yeah, I'm trying to stay nimble to it, and then just recognize, like, hey, where are the listeners at, and what questions do they frequently have, and where can I meet them halfway?
Yeah, and maybe I'll just for listeners too, and letting the audience know, like, being a police officer, and maybe your experience is the same or different, but on my side, um, people would generally be worried, what's the police service going to think about this? Like, what's my chief going to think about
Mm-hmm.
this? Are they just going to shut me down? I actually found I was very upfront and open right at the beginning about the intent of doing these kind of shows. Um, and I found I actually got a lot of support because of that. And the chief here, a lot of the higher ups, the commissioned officers, like, they know about the show. They show a lot of support for it. They don't necessarily agree with everything that is said on there, but I
Yeah.
mean, I'm mainly there to provide people a platform and let the audience learn about this person or what they're talking about. And I can have the opposite side of it, the whole debate or whatever it is, the next week, or we
Mm-hmm.
can bring in people of different opinions, but it's really opening those doors of communication. So if anybody's thinking about doing a podcast, maybe starting with that.
Yeah,
Let
no, that's fantastic. Yeah, and that's come up before where, like, where this even started my show was so that we could get a recruiting message out at scale, right? So me and my recruiter recognized the power of podcasts. We were on one, shout out to Police Applicant Podcast with Ken. But after that, we're like, man, we try to give everyone the time of day, especially in the literally the worst time that anyone, generations past, would say for recruiting, which was 2020 and 2021. We're slowly getting out of that, and luckily, we're very much out of that in my neighborhood. But it's just to say that you can talk to someone for 30 to an hour, or you could record it for 45 minutes to an hour and then share it and then follow up with them for 20 minutes. And that 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour is going to be of so much more value, right? So we've established some basic things. You get a vibe for us. If you listen to the podcast and you hate everything you heard, it's probably not the destination for you. And how much time saved, right? And so we thought about strategically from scale and then kind of marketing, and then yeah, we had huge buy-in from the. I mean, that was ultimately the conversation was with the big bosses, and to hear, the number one in my agency say like, "Hey, it's cool," just in a group setting, he's just like, "Hey, it's cool what Tung's doing with the podcast," and do yourself the favor to make yourself an asset, right? So whatever you're doing that might be a little over here, like as long as it serves back, I think that's a good way to avoid that fear that you talked about earlier. Um, it's front of mind, especially because I just hopped back on Ironsight's podcast.
Okay.
He is a strength conditioning, tactical fitness guru down in Bay Area of the U.S. And he's not in law enforcement, but he works and trains frequently with law enforcement. And he talks a lot about law enforcement's engagement with the community, right? Like COVID hit everybody hard as a business owner, it hit him hard. And so he has a vested interest as like just a civilian to like public safety and the dynamics in the city in the Bay Area. So having these conversations, he brought up that he found it very uncommon and very unique, and for him, of value to have a police officer able to speak pretty candidly. And
Yeah.
yeah, and what I said there, and I want to know your thoughts on this, is that what helped me get there, and it wasn't overnight. It was very uncomfortable at first, but I came out of community engagement at the time I went into recruiting, and I looked at them as the same role in a lot of ways, a huge overlap. But I'm like, hey, I can get in front of a group of 20 or 100 or 200, and I can speak candidly where they're like, oh man, the police are hurting and they're frustrated. And he's giving us a sense of what the average officer thinks and feels and what would empower them to do their job. That's not going off the rails. It's just like that's what the public wants. And
Yeah.
it's the same thing that any community officer of value would say, any street sergeant or command staff or the chief or what have you. Like they have these really raw, organic conversations in a meeting hall, that kind of thing. So why would it be different? Why should it be any different to do it on a recorded platform? Because we should also always assume that we're being recorded. So really,
Yeah.
when they don't take that strong deviation, and you're clearly not, any adult will recognize you're not representing your agency. You are coming on here in this vein, in this format. You just happen to be a cop as well, which gives you really valuable insight that everyone should consider. Then, yeah, like that's what we're talking about.
I get there's like there could be a gray area, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we'll call it that. And you know, I would think most members that I've had on and the things I've done myself, we're looking to just truly get a message out and get more eyes and ears onto the issues that we're seeing, that we're experiencing. Um, but again, it's that whole like, well, it'll just take one to ruin it for the rest of them. So there's the fear of that. I
Yep.
think that's what a lot of the maybe the police services that are out there would have. Uh, One of the things that I brought up actually when I was looking at starting this too was our president of our police association at the time had gone and spoken to one of the bigger news agencies here. I think it was like CTV or CBC. Anyways, they all do this, and I know they do it in the US too with the big ones. But he went and gave like a half-hour interview, and then when you read the article that they put out subsequent to that, they took two sentences out of
Mm.
the whole thing.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And in my conversation with him was, uh, he's like, why did we waste time even doing that? Like, and I get you have to speak to the media and it's about trust and transparency, but it's frustrating as hell.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, well, okay, you do that still, and they can spin it whatever way they want to, because a lot of times it's taken out of context and it's missing a lot of information. But why aren't we putting out our own thing in the meantime and
Mm.
speaking to it, and we can give as much detail as possible, or we'll bring in the critic or critics and speak to them and say, that's nice, you have all this theoretical knowledge, here's all the practical experience and what it actually shows you, what your utopia does not work here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was a lot of that and just getting some truth out there. In Canada, at least, it was much easier for me to kind of speak to a lot of those current events and things that were going on. It's much harder in the US. You have like a million podcasts down there. So kudos to you for like getting in there and having that actual following. the on the Canadian side, it was very much, I was just finding a lot of the podcasts were very focused on mental health, some
Mm-hmm.
on physical health.
Yeah.
And those are like they're the kind of the safe topics, but I wanted to really get out there and talk about those things such as like drugs and human trafficking, sex trafficking. Like
Mm-hmm.
people see it and they're like, "Oh, that's terrible," and they're shocked for a second because they see the words, but they don't truly understand it or know what's going on. So um, that's something that I was trying to really put out there. I've been doing a lot on national security as well. So it's like there's so much to talk about that we're not talking about. And we need people with the experience like yourself, like me, that are in the middle of this stuff right now. We're the best voices to be doing this. And like I'm grateful that my police service is supportive of it, that the higher ups are supportive of it, because I don't come in with any bad intent, but I keep the lines of communication open. And yeah, so I think these are all important points.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I want to go back. I want to go to two areas. The first being the media relationship, right? And I've heard so many public information officers and command staff, or even like street cop sergeants that are like, "Hey, I was asked to go talk to the camera, and I felt comfortable saying what I was going to say, pretty limited." And then, yeah, it's all spliced up. It's all out of context, and I get it. It's easy to hate on the media, and all I'll say with that piece is that they are a business and they operate a certain way. So, hey, like those of you in the media, just like everyone, I'm not trying to paint you with a broad stroke. A lot of you are trying to do a fantastic job with journalism, which is critical, like
Mhm.
especially in our societies, right? But at the same time, I can see where the reaction happens. I know certain agencies that withdraw from the media because they're like, you get the press release because you've done me dirty. Like I did
Yeah,
this very candid interview. You took a couple pieces that just made me look like XYZ. That was not the intent. And so I think that what I'm trying to say is like it would make sense why certain people and agencies decide, hey, you know what, news station A, you kind of burned some bridges. So yes, you will get the statement just like news station B and C, but I can elect to talk to news station B and C and give them the time. At the same time, I think that it's really relevant to have the conversation that you brought up, which is that if you don't share your story, everyone else will share it for you. So you do
exactly.
see more agency leaders, more organizations leaning into formats like this. Like there's a lot of agencies that have their own podcasts, they have their own YouTube channels, they have their own social medias that are very active. So engaged people in the community that care and politicians in the
Yeah,
community, they actually are following that because they might have the full scope of what happened. And I think that that might be a hack. Again, I'm not a public information officer, but for those listening in, that might be that or be that soon, or might have the lead in is like maybe you bring your own multimedia to film the same conversation when the news cameras are there, and like
yeah,
you put the full version on, and then people that are either advocates or critics or everyone in between in the community, they know, hey, actually, like this PD actually puts the whole raw deal on. So it would incentivize news outlets to actually not deviate and not splice it up because they know the full truth is going to be there. And then ultimately, the public will recognize that your news station intentionally doctors it up, which is not of benefit to anybody.
yeah.
And so maybe
Okay,
that's a tool.
there, man, I could talk about this for hours, uh, but I'll try and do a couple things here. So, talking about the media itself, yeah, definitely. Like I've had journalists on my podcast, and yeah, there's excellent ones out there doing really good work. Some of them even putting themselves in harm's way, which I wouldn't recommend, but
Hmm.
they get some pretty good stories out there. I think that side of things, yeah, there's a number of issues. One, it comes down to the business side, the first to print, the first to put something out, the sensationalization of headlines, like the way the headlines always read. It's always what the cop did to someone and then what that person was doing, which caused the cop to come in
Mm,
and use force or lethal force. So it's just the order of things are not right. And like we're hired by society to go out and do a certain type of job that nobody else wants to do. So why is it reported almost in the opposite light? The other thing is, I think it's a very saturated market. Anybody can pick up a pen or get a keyboard and say they're media. So you have a lot of people putting stuff out that, like, they're not either not credible, it's not backed by anything. You can just put out any flippant statement on Twitter
Yeah,
or
especially now,
Facebook.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
everyone's got the mic. Yeah.
and people blow up on it. And part of the thing that I think we're getting to is we're really trying to educate the public to just pause for a second and, okay, you saw this statement, like, it's just words. So what is the meaning behind it? What's the context behind it? But further to that, and I know people are busy, but with the way the world is today, you're going to have to start looking into these things. You have to look at who's writing that and what's behind them, like who funds them, and where do you get your sources of information, because it could go pretty deep. So this is some of the stuff that I harp on a lot. The other side is on, so for police. So yeah, we need to do a way better job of telling our stories. One of the things that, I guess, body cameras. So that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be part of the way we're going to be telling our stories, because
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
becoming a pretty commonplace thing now. I don't know any cops that aren't fine with the body cameras. I think most of us are like,
Yeah,
let the video roll.
I
Wait till you
agree. Yeah.
see how people act.
Hesitant at first, right? But then I've not met a group of cops that from an agency that after they have them, no one
Yeah,
wants to get rid of them, right? Because
yeah.
how many false
So,
allegations, it clears up all this stuff.
but one of the units we do have here, so it's with our public safety unit. So they go to all protests and stuff. It's the evidence gathering team. So we have guys, and there's some girls in there now, but they're embedded in the lines with
Mm,
people, and
mm-hmm.
they've got, the big fancy cameras. And while everybody else has their phones out, they're like, we have our camera out too, and we're recording the same event. So when you put out those 10-second clips, that's nice. I'm going to roll the whole video, and we'll see the pre context that set up this whole event and everything that took place before. And then we'll let people decide. We'll let the public decide.
Mm-hmm.
And I think more times than not, I can only think of times that people have ended up siding with the police and being like, yeah, you shouldn't have been there, or you shouldn't have been acting like that. So,
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's such a good point, right? Like any tool has a potential benefit and then also detriments, right? We don't want to over rely. That's a recent conversation, Tom Ovens on my show, which is that body cams can show a lot. They also, there's a ton they don't show. It's one angle, right? And so we have to remind ourselves, just like a security camera, what that means for you. Don't rely on it. Don't remove your level of articulation and the detail in your reports and on and
yeah,
on. So no, I love the fact that you're having real talk about things. And that's where when I came in with Blue Grit, a lot of it was just how do I guess it's firmed out more as I go. But yes, there's an incorporation of wellness, but it's also the majority of it is really mindset and ownership and routines and things that we can integrate all this information so that we can ultimately be better cops and better individuals, because I think they're one and the same. Like I think that the better cop you are, the better you're going to be at home, and vice
yeah,
versa. If the caveat is like you have to be good at home to be the best cop you are. Like we know that you could short term it and be really good at one and then an utter failure at the other, but that's not the goal. And so my mission is just try to present information that people can take all these inputs and form the best version of themselves. So they have these examples, they have these insights, learn from the mistakes of me and my guests and their insights from their bosses and
mm,
yesteryear, what have you, so that you don't have to make these mistakes. Because I love the podcasts that are about wellness and trauma. That's not all I want to talk about. It's there. It's a foundational piece that we need to recognize, and then like what do we do with it? And that's more of my goal, and that's where I really appreciate all your insights.
one thing maybe would put it into perspective too for people is if I talk about uh, the people that kind of solicit, like, maybe they want to be on the show, or they're
Mm,
like, hey, I got this new book coming out, and can we talk about it? So out of all the guests that reach out to me to be on the show, I would say it's like 99% are in that mental health, physical health realm of things,
hmm.
where it's very few and far between that want to come on and talk current events.
Mm.
And it's like, but it's all intertwined, right? Like current
Yeah.
events has a massive impact on your physical and mental health. Um,
Yeah, it's true.
but I think that just speaks to like how either afraid people are to talk about their job, to, it's like, why is that? We need people explaining what we do because we're not doing ourselves any favors by whatever people want to call it, the blue wall of silence. They usually think it's for corrupt reasons. It's mostly because people are just scared to say anything.
Yeah.
Uh, for whatever the media is going to spin it some way or things get taken out of context. But so yeah, just it shows like a real difference in who's reaching out and trying to talk about things. And it's like, okay, we got a lot on this side, but where are the current events and where are the people talking about the real harm that's being done out there? Um, with a little bit of critique and criticism, I think that's fair to have, especially from the policing side, as long as you're doing it respectfully. And again, you're bringing in the people to speak to that can either offer the I say the opposition to it, or the academic type piece to it, and you can kind of get into that back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you have those guardrails again, you're being mindful, as you said, like, professionally with respect. Um, if you, just like when you're on the street, and that's what I've heard so many people say, imagine your mom or grandma's watching you in this encounter. And then
Yeah,
we all will think about, oh shoot, there's plenty of times where I'd be embarrassed or I'd be ashamed of how I talked to someone or how I was acting or how it appeared I was acting. So not to say we can be perfect, but to say that those could be governors, right? So
yeah,
if your policy allows you to speak out and have a persona or have a platform, then be mindful and assume that everything you say and write will be read by your whole chain, all the
mhm,
politicians, your family, right? So I think that those could be healthy things, but it's certainly not for everyone. For me, it came out of a lot of angst. And so you point out like the current events affecting how we do the job. Absolutely. Does it affect our wellness, our ability to do the job? Yes, absolutely. So a couple weeks ago when you recorded with me and you asked me what it was like being in the Seattle area or being in the States with COVID. And I was like, yeah, that was terrible. Like, I don't try to think about it actively, and I actually shared that little
yeah,
nugget with a couple of my old officers. Like, we were all on patrol. I was a patrol sergeant on a squad, and they were all kind of in the briefing room that day for a mixed number of reasons. And we're kind of reminiscing. I was like, shoot, this is like a third of our crew back from years ago. And I told them about that question that you gave me, and I was like, I try not to dwell. Like, it's always moving forward, but when I went back and I started actually thinking about that and peeling apart some of that, I was like, that was really rough. Like, that was pretty terrible. When I mean, I worked through Ferguson, and there were random times when people I was just in the parking lot going to take like a theft report, and people would
yeah,
walk up like, hands up, don't shoot, and I'm like,
yeah.
what are you? What is happening right now? And
That's even
then
up here. You would get
yeah,
that up here. Like the America, I don't think Americans realize how much of an impact they have globally.
well,
But
it's not the American way to really think about the rest of the world, but no,
yeah,
I that's
but the
a fair
impact is
point.
so like we hear all the same narratives, maybe a slightly less in scale, just due to demographics and like differences in population. But the all that's up here. Like even now, we walk into places, people still say those things like "hands up, don't shoot," or "I can't breathe," and it's like okay, they just say it
Yeah.
as they're passing by. So
Yeah, that is interesting. I'm glad you shared that because I was gonna ask that, like how much did that translate? And I think it just really shows and underlines, in constructive reasons, was why I'm trying to bring this up. It shows that people see what they want to see, and we can't take it personally. Like, that is just how
yeah,
the I'm not trying to drag in the media again, but it's how these forces, this fear element, this corrosive mob mentality, like whatever bandwagon we want to jump on, it's usually motivated by some extreme, ungrounded emotion, and usually it's fear, right? Like the reason why we do anything, pleasure seeking, pain or fear avoidance, and so with that, it's like it's this really like tricky, deceptive thing is that like we feel like jumping on the fear will keep us safer, will make us better, more secure or whatnot. Like, is that stuff
yeah.
that you think about?
Yeah, I think it's just it gets people like drama. Maybe that's why it's always like the last award at the Oscars. It's
Hmm.
it's like the biggest thing, right? People like the true crime stories, but they like the drama of everything from their personal lives to what they see going on in other people's lives. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for like fear and kind of the things that are going on out there. It's a huge motivating factor. It probably gets the most clicks if I was guessing, but it's definitely something we have to be aware of and speaking to, right? Again, I think the transparency piece in the last few years, police have done better than any other industry I can think of. And, the police services themselves are better than most organizations at putting stuff out there and explaining things now, right? So they're trying to find ways to do it. Um, it for me, sometimes I think they're still a little too safe, but again, that's why we have the podcast and people doing some different things, some really cool stuff in the different medias and mediums of things that are going on. So yeah, definitely. As long as is I think as long as we kind of continue down this path and on this trajectory, I think it's going to be better overall for policing, for law enforcement, for security, you name it. It's I think we're on a good path right now.
Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah, these conversations of fear I think are so important, and why I'm continuing to pick it apart and dwell on it is because I think that is really what's holding us back now, right? I talked about how in my purview we're coming out of the worst time, and I feel like some people aren't ready to climb out and just put a little bit more effort into being constructive and positive in that in police culture in general. And I've thought about this. You talk about the drama, like people want the drama. And years ago, I remember talking about this with buddies outside of the police context, and like, why are people gravitating towards drama? And where we arrived, if I'm accurate, is that we were supposing that it's because people didn't have enough hardship, is why they may be inclined to inject drama, right? So people
Hmm.
that want to throw that social hand grenade in the office, whatever setting, right? Or like the neighborhood drama and like what's going on down the street is because usually you're kind of at home all day, you're just watching everybody. Maybe you're not working, you're retired, and so you become that kind of that gossiper, or you become that watchdog and make everyone's business your business because you don't have your own business. And
Yeah.
so I think with all like the reality TV of the last couple decades, it's like there's not a lot of hardship for people that are watching reality TV all day. Like there are a lot of people in Canada and the US, and then certainly the rest of the world, that like their drama is getting food on the table and working, 15 hours a day or what have you, like, taking a bus for an hour or two just to get to work, to get enough
Yeah.
scrapings to bring home to their 3, 4, or 5 kids. Like that's drama. They don't have time for this BS. So I wonder how much of it is that. And then with that said, integrating it back into police cultures, like if we're looking for the drama, if we're looking for the fight, are we not remembering our purpose and like why we're even here? Like what are we doing? And to your point, like having the real talk about what's out there in the community. And we could talk about all the ways that we're restricted and handcuffed, or we could talk about what we can do. And that's where I love a lot of the conversations that have been on this show, and certainly yours, right? Just more like, let's just talk about what we do, not what we can't do.
Yeah. I think yeah, safety and security used to be like a community objective
Mm,
where it was everybody was in on it. And if there was somebody in your neighborhood that you're like, this person isn't from here, someone was keeping an eye out for that. Or, you know, the kids are out front, maybe one parent's out front and watching all the kids. And,
yeah.
you just knew you could trust somebody to have your back in your community. Well, I think a lot of that has been taken away. Maybe, well, I don't know if taken's a word. I think that's part of it. I think there are some, it's not to be conspiracy theorists, but I think there are some people in that try to take things away.
No,
But
yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of it is laziness. I think a lot of it is people just don't have the motivation to do a lot of this stuff anymore. And it's all kind of gone over to, hey, just put it on the police. You know, keep giving them more people and they'll just call them. They'll solve your problems. And yeah, it's not working. We see that like massive police budgets, but our response times can go up. And I'm not specifically talking about in Edmonton, but like I'm tracking news both across the
Everywhere.
US and Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And you see a lot of these debates going on right now. Like, what is the role of police? Where should they be? And it's like, okay, you can take us out of certain functions, certain communities, but who's going to fill the role? It's not the people watching reality TV.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to
Yeah.
do the job. So there's like a huge disconnect, a huge gap in, I think, people's expectations and the reality of what's going on out there. I think we can largely fill that role by educating on a lot of these topics, but it ultimately is up to the individual to go and get educated and seek out the proper sources, and then figure out, like, okay, next election, what am I voting for? I got to look at people's, their platforms. I'm not a single issue voter. I go out and actively participate in some of these community meetings and offer my voice at them. Parent councils. How many people even go to their parent councils anymore? I can tell you it's a few, because I've worked in some of the schools in some capacities, and it's like,
Mm.
you have 1,000 students, you maybe get 12 parents out. But if the
Wow.
school does something they don't like, they're all going to show up and complain.
Oh,
So
standing
you're
room
like,
only, right? Yeah.
yeah, and it's like, where were you at the beginning of it all, right? But so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think for police, for law enforcement, and then to a bigger extent, I think there's a lot of, when you talk about like national security, we've actually seen that change up here through one of our branches who does, I'll just call them like the spy stuff. But they're putting out like some more public messages and just saying like, hey, be aware, there's foreign influence and things like that. And I was like, wow, I never thought they would actually put stuff like that out, like messaging. And it's good to see, because everybody harping on it before were just called conspiracy theorists. You're like, now you're literally being told by all sides. So I think it's opening the door. The podcast stuff has blown up. There's a lot of people really looking for that information out there, and the long form discussions. I don't know how many people have told me that they appreciate having that half hour to hour, sometimes even longer. Like, you get on a roll with guests. It's not hard to
Yeah.
go on.
I know we
And
could go for hours. Like, I already know it. Yeah.
so you get people in, and that's some of the best feedback I've received, is like, wow, you asked this person, you got depth to it, and then I got to hear like, oh, okay, this happened and this happened and then this thing, instead of just the headlines, and I'm left to my imagination of what actually is going on around me. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple things I pull out of that I want to circle back on. And one is like where this started, right? Like, we used to all be invested in safety. And that's prehistoric, right? That's like how a community, a tribe, call it what you want, a group of people could survive, is like they weren't all standing guard 24/7 looking out for threats. Like, they took turns. And so essentially, like,
Mhm.
what is the police? I mean, shoot, I mean, we could look at like kind of Peelian philosophy, and we should probably do a riff on that, or a different episode on that, bring in Mark, but
Yeah.
on a lot of topics. But yeah, essentially, like, police were, it's an outsource of safety. Like, my kid's going to go to high school one day, and I hope that there's an officer in that high school. That's some years away, but I can't be there. I can't be with her in high school. I can't be with her now all day. I can't be with her when she's an adult all day, whether I'm an officer or not. But I trust in the police that are around, and hopefully have a society that supports them to have enough police to police the area that they need to, right? And so on, right? So it all goes back to that trust piece, and ties right back into to the press and podcasts and sharing story. But where do we get along is just when we share, and when we're just a little bit more upfront. I know we can't say everything we want unfiltered, for sure. That's not even what we do at the grocery store. Like, that doesn't, we don't have healthy relationships if we just say everything we're thinking all the time. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, but like, let's connect, let's make an effort to listen and do share and to commune, right? So, man, I think I need to give credit to Dr. Gino for that connection, right? And so when I say like better cops, better community, it's not just a tagline, but it's like, I recognize that I will be of a community far after I'm in the community of cops. far
Yeah.
after I am, I hang up the badge, whether it's on my terms or not. Like, I got to be a person in a community, just like I was a person in a community since the day I was born. And so ultimately, we need to remember we're humans, and the majority of us, the huge majority of us, are doing the best we can with what we have. And the huge majority of us have good intentions, although we make some mistakes, but the majority of us aren't making those egregious mistakes either, right? That are involving the police. So like, if we can just meet in the middle before we have these catastrophic issues, to your point of that, like, that school kind of council meeting or whatnot, like, and we can get there, right? We can get there slowly. Um, if people are just willing to come in and be open to that.
Yeah. And even going back to the topic of fear, because I think you had sent that ahead to me, and I was thinking about this, and I've never really necessarily had a fear on the job. I kind of have a lot of, you go into a lot of things knowing like it could go a certain way, but I don't know, it doesn't feel like a fear to me. One of the things that I think is a big fear on this job, though, when you just said it, was the realization that like when you're done this job, like you're gone.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe like a handful of people remember you or talk about you in whatever capacity, but like you're just gone. And I think that for a lot of people is an actual fear. Maybe they don't realize it now, but as you get toward the end of your career, um, you start to think like, well, what is my legacy and my identity, and what am I going to be doing going forward? So yeah, I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that because that was something I was thinking on the last couple of days here, and I was like, yeah, it's a good point. So
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a huge driver for me. As I've shared, that's a lot of why I do anything that I do publicly. From losing my buddy Diego, who was all about like community connection when I was not. He dragged me into things. But then, having my own close calls and wanting to share a story, because I know that it hits people in all these ways. That's why I'm such an advocate for peer support, and anyone that wants to, lend an ear or wants my ear, like I try to be there, right? And so this is something that I can do at scale. Of course, intersecting still with this whole job, but so many episodes, more than I would have ever expected from the beginning, circle back or at least touch on what you just talked about, which is that our days are numbered in this job, and that is where the stoicism, it's not to paralyze us. I think that it can be really empowering when we recognize that. So let's keep it meaningful. Let's keep it as something we want to do. But even cutting back to the beginning of the conversation where you were told, hey, you should have a fallback career or like a backup. We should always have a backup. And I wrote a post way back where it was like the backup career, because we'd talk about backup guns, backup mags, backup flashlights. But what about our career? Like, what about our livelihood if not this thing? And yeah, people may say all kinds of things. And like, I recognize I'm at a very different point in maybe a place of comfort to say that now versus when I was younger. But also I would challenge maybe not, right? Because when I was younger, I had my youth. Like, I had no family. I didn't have any dependents. And so if something should happen, like, I think that is why I'm really excited to keep doing things like this. Cause I'm not saying I'm going to be good enough to be like running a podcast to pay my bills, but certainly doing the podcast has helped my communication skills, my
yeah,
speaking skills. Writing is helping in all kinds of realms, right? So it's just to invite people to think broadly, and yes, think about things that you're excited about outside of the job, outside of your job social circles, right? Not all your buddies should be cops.
yeah, yeah. I think man, you got a lot of good points there. You know what? I think the biggest thing to take away from that is it's as long as you're passing it on and helping out the next person, the next group, whatever that might be, or the bigger organization, as long as you're passing those things on, because to not pass that on, I think is selfish. And when you're passing it on, it's not to tell somebody, and it's not just about age. It's not like it always has to be someone younger than you, but
Yeah.
just you're given that knowledge, and it's to say, this is, if this situation comes up, look at this, expect this, and think about these things ahead of time. It's not to say you have to be this right now or you should start doing this right now necessarily, but you should have this in your mind. And if a scenario comes up that is like we are in now or what we're talking about, that you've thought about it and been prepared. And kind of on some of the pieces you were talking about earlier, so just about like in the leadership realm of things, uh, I, I I agree with you. Like, you have to fix yourself first. I think that's the hardest thing for people to do, is look inward and be like,
Mm-hmm.
I need to, like, I'm a giant mess and I got to do these things and fix my life and make better
Yep.
decisions, eat
Mm-hmm.
healthier and everything. There's lots you can do. Um, but you have to fix yourself first. And then when you're in a place that you can be, I'll say, consistent and stable, that allows you to be more reliable, then you move into helping other people. So you can help if you're a training officer, you help your recruit. If you're on a team, you're helping your peers. Even upward, I've had these kinds of conversations with supervisors and other people. So it's both directions. Like, maybe you're a different rank, but we're all adults here and we all have different experiences. So you can speak to that in both directions. But it's improving yourself, then improving individuals once you yourself are more stable and can be reliable for them. And it always pops up on my X feed. I don't know why, but those like wisdom threads,
Mm.
and there's always a picture in one, and it's like the dad, or it looks like an older guy, and he's missing all these puzzle pieces from his silhouette.
Oh, yeah,
He's
yeah.
like giving one to this
Mm-hmm.
kid, and he's like, the kid's just missing one, or yeah. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's I
He's like
just
taking the larger adult figures, like taking pieces out to put them into the child, right?
yeah.
To fill the child.
And that's just like, that always kind of comes to mind, that imagery for me. It's just about, you got to be good at home, you got to be good at work, and then you can start helping others. And then once you help others, then you can pass it on to bigger teams, the organization, and then make pushing change throughout. So that, it's funny. I just did my promotion
Yes.
interview,
Yeah.
and
I
this
wasn't
is
gonna ask you because I didn't know how much you wanted
oh
to share on that.
yeah, we just finished it. I was successful, so the promotion, like, I'll be a sergeant in at the end of January. They're taking
Nice.
back.
Nice,
So,
man. Not
um, but
surprised.
I talked about all this stuff in there, in that interview, and just being stable at home, being consistent. That lets me then help peers and supervisors, right? I can be the number two IC on the team and helping them out, because they forgot to approve reports or do some paperwork, but I'm squared away. I can help them with that now. And then it's pushing. I had a whole thing in there about pushing intelligence and some of these ideas further throughout the organization. So it was impacting units and impacting the organization. And the biggest thing too is when you get to that third piece, and this is super hard, even for myself, but for others, realizing that you're probably going to get zero recognition, zero accolades. You're just doing the right things for the right reasons. So it's nice to see people succeeding. They're taking the pieces you gave them. They're using the language that you've been speaking. Like, you can see the influence that you have on others, and that's probably the coolest part about all of this. And that's honestly, again, back to the podcast stuff. In the last 2.5 years, the people I've talked to through this, they're so successful. The things I've learned, the things like talking to people such as yourself, and then implementing that in my own game, that I'm trying to help others with.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best part of it all. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. When you're talking about everything you said, starting with the puzzle piece image, are you familiar with Shel Silverstein, the Giving Tree, that children's book?
I think I've heard of it.
Yeah, so Shel Silverstein, just because I've opened this can of worms, is like all these goofy poems with these silly cartoons that he drew, and then my daughter was really into like the silliness of it, right? Like, and I didn't really remember the Giving Tree, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna get this book and I'm gonna show
Yeah.
it to you. And it's like rather than all these goofy, over the top poems, with all these rhymes, it's just like this very plain toned book, and it's basically the Giving Tree and this boy that's climbing in the limbs and eating the fruit as a kid, and then he grows older and leaves and comes back saying, hey, I need to build a house. So the tree's like, well, take some limbs and take what you need. And it's like kind of like the archetype of the mother that just gives like all of herself to the child, and then the child leaves, starts a family, the mother's all alone, right? So the tree's alone. Spoiler, this book's been around for like 40 years. So anyway, um the kid comes back as an old man and says like, hey, like I got, let me backtrack. The old man comes back after building the house, and the tree's chopped down and all that, and it's just a stump, and the stump tree is like, I'm sorry, I have nothing left else to give. And the
Mhm.
old man's like, I just need a place to sit. And so he sits on the stump, and then they're just kind of there together. And I'm reading this to like my 5-year-old. I'm like, this is so depressing. And it
It's real
could be,
deep,
right?
though.
What's that?
Real deep meaning, though.
It's deep. Yeah. And so it could be depressing, or, the flip after that, like kind of like I pulled myself out of it, and she's like, I don't get it. I'm like, it's okay. We'll revisit it later. But I was like, it doesn't have to be sad. It just is, right? And so we all have a certain number of days on the job and a certain number of days on this earth, and we do the best we can. Like, no regrets. We're paying it forward. To your point, like that's really what the podcasts are about, and how we bring energy to our job is like, we just want to be better and make other people better and share information and keep growing, right? That's the game, not where we go, but how we grow. And I really didn't mean to make a rhyme there, but I'm just gonna roll with it. So
No, it
yeah,
was
going
spot
back to
on. I get it.
legacy. Yeah,
Yeah.
man.
So you know what? Yeah, I agree with all that. It's I think too what people should realize is if you're working on yourself and then you're helping others, and you get to those points where you are consistent and you have that reliability piece, it honestly it helps protect you yourself in a lot of other aspects in life. So like at work, when you get complaints, because complaints are almost inevitable in policing, I'm not worried about them. Like I feel confident I can speak to what I've done, and financially, I'm in a good place. Family wise, I'm in a good place, and it's all these things. It's like as bad things might happen to you, you've got all this armor on, and you don't have to worry so much about things. Whereas like I've seen people have the same, maybe some issue comes up in their life that's similar to something I've had, and they're freaking out about it because they've got 20 other things they're worrying about. It's it's just like if you can truly work on yourself, start building up, fixing things, making better decisions, and it just, man, it leads to like bigger and better things. It leads to greatness. And not saying that I'm great, but just
Oh, you
saying,
are. You are. Yeah. Don't
just
shirk it away. Yeah.
just saying that, it really does. You see it help others, because I've seen this with my teammates and some of the work that they do. That is awesome work. And but you get those relationships where you're like, well, you know about their home life, and then you know how they're doing at work, and then you see them growing. Like some of the most inspiring people on this job are the youngest people on the job who've got all that gusto and want to keep going. Um, but it's when you start seeing them implement all these things, and you're like, man, you're doing all the stuff that I'm doing now, but I'm like, 10, 15 years older than you. I wish
Mm-hmm.
I had someone counseling me on all this stuff before, but we didn't have podcasts back in my day. So
Yeah. No, that's so good, and that's that piece where it's not just like mentoring or sharing story for those younger or coming in, but yeah, I think one of the most validating things is when the older guard says something like, "Man, what we're doing with peer support, like I wish we had more of this," and I'm like, "Please say that louder, right? Like say it for the room, kind of thing." Not
yeah,
because it's not like I told you so. It's like, no, you didn't. You did the best you could with what you had, but for you to say it is so much more powerful in my estimation than me saying it because I'm the peer support guy, right? So I think it's all just talking about how we can continue to get better for ourselves and our team, which is really what this project's all about. And I'm very appreciative for your time and insights. I've already made a nod to a few topics I'd love to retackle with you, and I know that we could go on and on and on. So we will at a different time with Mark and maybe some others. But Nathan, thank you so much. Congrats on your promotion. Well earned. I love that there are more emerging leaders that are thinking of these things and of this mindset. Um, could you please share with the audience where they can find you, where they can find your show, and anything else you're working on?
Yeah, I do most of my stuff on LinkedIn. So it's just under my name, Nathan Romas, not Ramos. I'm not
Hmm.
Filipino. Most people call me that. Even on the street, half my complaints come in with the wrong last name.
Interesting.
It's
They
R
see
O
what they
M.
want to see.
Yeah. So LinkedIn, and then probably the other best spot is on Instagram. It's just at TQP780. So that's for the Quiet Professional Podcast. And the podcast is on all the regular platforms. So Spotify, Apple, Google, all of it. So yeah, give it a listen.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again so much, man. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.